The wind howled across the rugged Wyoming landscape, threatening to tear Willow Lambert's hair from its pins as she stood motionless at the edge of the precipice, her gaze fixed on the dizzying drop below. The vast canyon stretched beneath her feet like an open mouth waiting to swallow her whole, its jagged teeth of rock promising a swift end to the pain that had driven her to this desperate moment. Matthew Paxton saw her from a distance, a silhouette of deep blue calico against the amber sunset. Even before he recognized who she was, something in the rigid way she held herself sent a chill down his spine. He dismounted his chestnut mare with practiced ease, tethering the horse to a scrub oak before approaching on foot, his steps deliberately heavy enough to announce his presence without startling her. "Miss Lambert," he called, his voice almost lost to the wind. When she didn't respond, he moved closer, cautious as if approaching a wounded animal. Her face, when he finally glimpsed it, was streaked with tears that carved clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. She was standing at the edge of the cliff. The cowboy slowly approached and said, "Step back with me." Willow didn't turn her head. "There's nothing to step back to, Mr. Paxton." "I reckon that's not true," Matthew said, coming to a halt several paces behind her. "South Pass City might not be much, but it's something, and you've got folks there who'd miss you proper." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Name one." "Me, for starters," he said, the words surprising him as much as they did her. This made her turn slightly, enough to regard him with red-rimmed eyes. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Matthew replied, taking another careful step forward. The wind threatened to steal his hat, and he clamped it more firmly to his head. "I know you make the best cherry pie this side of the Mississippi. I know you've been keeping your father's general store afloat since he took ill last winter. I know you read poetry to the schoolchildren every Wednesday afternoon." Willow's shoulders sagged slightly. "That's just things I do, not who I am." "It's more than most people in this territory will ever accomplish," Matthew countered. He was close enough now that he could have reached out and touched her sleeve if he dared. "Please, Miss Lambert, step back with me. Whatever's brought you here, we can figure it out together." The wind died down momentarily, leaving an eerie silence between them. Willow looked back toward the canyon, its depths darkening as the sun continued its descent. "The bank is foreclosing on the store. Tomorrow, everything my family built, everything we survived to create, will be gone by sunset." Her voice broke on the last word. "I've failed them all." Matthew hesitated, then extended his hand, palm up. "My mother used to say that as long as you're drawing breath, nothing's truly lost. Please, Willow, take my hand." Something in the way he said her name, not Miss Lambert, but Willow made her turn fully toward him for the first time. Her gaze dropped to his outstretched hand, rough and calloused from years of ranch work, then lifted to meet his eyes. "Why do you care what happens to me?" she whispered. "Because this town needs you," Matthew said, then more softly. "And maybe because I've been watching you from afar longer than is proper to admit." A fresh tear slipped down her cheek as she wavered, the toe of her boot still dangerously close to the edge. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to face tomorrow." "You don't have to be strong alone," Matthew answered. "Sometimes courage is just taking someone's hand when they offer it." The last rays of sunlight caught in her auburn hair as Willow Lambert took a deep, shuddering breath. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her trembling fingers in Matthew's waiting palm. His grip was firm as he gently pulled her away from the precipice, leading her to safer ground. When she was several yards from the edge, her knees buckled and she sank to the ground, her body racked with sobs. Matthew knelt beside her, awkwardly placing a hand on her shoulder. "I've got nothing left," she managed between gasps. "The letter came this morning. Final notice." $2,000 by noon tomorrow, or everything my parents built is gone." Matthew was quiet for a moment, his face thoughtful in the fading light. "2,000 is a mighty sum." "Impossible," Willow corrected. "Even if I sold every last item in the store, I wouldn't come close." The cowboy rose to his feet, extending his hand once more to help her up. "Miss Lambert, I believe we should get you back to town before night falls completely, and on the way, I'd like to tell you about an idea I have." Her eyes, still swimming with tears, searched his face for any sign of mockery or pity, but found only earnest determination. Hesitantly, she accepted his hand and allowed him to pull her to her feet. "What kind of idea could possibly help now?" she asked. Matthew Paxton's lips curved into a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "A desperate one, befitting desperate times, but first, let me get you home safely." He led her to where his mare waited patiently, untethering the animal with practiced movements. "Can you ride, Miss Lambert?" "Since I was 5, she replied, a hint of pride momentarily displacing her despair. "Good," Matthew said, lacing his fingers together to give her a boost up. Once she was settled in the saddle, he took the reins and began to lead the horse on foot. "Now about that bank." As they made their way back toward the lights of South Pass City, Wyoming, the cowboy outlined a plan so audacious that Willow found herself listening despite her conviction that all hope was lost. By the time the first buildings came into view, the tears on her face had dried, replaced by an expression of cautious, bewildered hope. Neither of them could have predicted how their lives would intertwine from that moment forward, nor the dangers and joys that awaited them in the days to come. But as Matthew helped Willow dismount in front of her family's store, their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary, and something unspoken passed between them, a promise, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement that whatever happened next, neither would face it alone. The general store looked forlorn in the gathering darkness, its windows reflecting the first stars of evening. Willow fumbled with the key, her hand still unsteady. "Are you certain about this, Mr. Paxton?" she asked, turning to face him before opening the door. "You barely know me. This plan of yours, it could cost you everything." Matthew's weathered face was solemn in the dim light. "Some things are worth risking everything for, Miss Lambert. Your father was kind to me when I first arrived in these parts with nothing but the clothes on my back and a half-starved horse." "I haven't forgotten that kindness," Willow swallowed hard. "And if we fail, then we fail together," he answered simply. "But at least we will have tried." She nodded once, decisively, and pushed open the door to Lambert's general store, the bell above jingling a welcome that seemed at odds with the gravity of their situation. Inside, the familiar scent of coffee beans, leather, and dried herbs enveloped them. Willow moved to light a lamp, its warm glow illuminating shelves stocked with goods that represented a lifetime of her family's hard work. "Pa built this store with his own hands after the war," she said softly, trailing her fingers along a countertop worn smooth by thousands of transactions. "Mama died bringing me into this world, but he never remarried, said I was handful enough." A sad smile touched her lips. "He poured everything into this place, and now with his mind slipping away more each day." "All the more reason not to give up," Matthew said, removing his hat as he stepped fully into the store. "Now, you mentioned there's a back room where we can talk privately." Willow led him through a doorway curtained with heavy fabric into the small living quarters behind the store. A pot of stew still simmered on the iron stove, forgotten in her earlier distress. The sound of labored breathing came from behind another closed door. "Pa's sleeping," she explained in a whisper. "The doctor gave him laudanum for the pain. He doesn't know about the foreclosure." "I couldn't bear to tell him." Matthew nodded, understanding. Let's sit and work out the details. They settled at a small table in the kitchen area, heads bent close together as Matthew explained his plan more thoroughly. As outlandish as it seemed at first, the more he spoke, the more Willow began to believe it might actually work. The Overland Bank's gold shipment arrives on tomorrow's noon stage, Matthew said, his voice barely above a whisper. Old man Hollister himself is escorting it. He doesn't trust anyone else with that much money. The stage stops for an hour while the passengers take lunch at Ruby's place. And you think we can convince Mr. Hollister to loan against my father's property instead of foreclosing? Willow asked, doubt creeping back into her voice. Matthew leaned forward, his blue eyes intent. Hollister's a businessman above all. If we can show him that providing a loan is more profitable than taking the property, he might agree. The key is having something valuable enough to sweeten the deal. But I've told you, I have nothing of value left. That's not entirely true, Matthew said carefully. You have information that could be extremely valuable to Hollister, information about what Wayland and his gang are planning. Willow's eyes widened. The Wayland gang. What do they have to do with any of this? They're planning to rob that same stage tomorrow, Matthew said grimly. I overheard two of them talking behind the saloon last night. They don't know I know. And you haven't told the sheriff, Willow gasped. Sheriff Jenkins is visiting his sister in Laramie. Won't be back until next week. Matthew ran a hand through his sandy hair. I was planning to warn Hollister myself, but then I saw you on that cliff and... He trailed off. And now you think we can use this information to bargain with Hollister, Willow finished for him, in exchange for holding off on the foreclosure. More than that, Matthew corrected, in exchange for a proper loan with reasonable terms. You save Hollister from losing the bank's gold and he helps you save your store. Everyone wins. Willow frowned, considering, except the Wayland gang. They've terrorized enough innocent folks in this territory, Matthew said, a hard edge entering his voice. It's time someone stood up to them. And if Hollister doesn't agree, or worse, if the Wayland gang discovers we betrayed their plans, Matthew's face was grave. Those are risks we'll have to take, but doing nothing guarantees you lose everything tomorrow. A long silence fell between them, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and her father's muffled coughing from the next room. Finally, Willow squared her shoulders. Very well, Mr. Paxton. I accept your help, and may God have mercy on us both if this fails. Matthew reached across the table and briefly covered her hand with his. Get some rest, Miss Lambert. Tomorrow will test us both in ways we can't imagine. As he rose to leave, Willow felt a curious mixture of dread and hope stirring in her chest. Matthew, she called softly as he reached the curtained doorway. When he turned, she continued, thank you, not just for this, but for... She gestured vaguely in the direction of the cliffs, understanding softened his features. Some debts can never be repaid, Willow. Your father saved me once. Perhaps tomorrow I can begin to return the favor. With that, he settled his hat back on his head, nodded once in farewell, and slipped out through the store and into the night, leaving Willow alone with her thoughts and the faint hope that perhaps, just perhaps, tomorrow wouldn't be the end after all. As dawn broke over the jagged horizon of South Pass City, Willow Lambert was already awake, having barely slept. She'd spent the night alternating between tending to her father and rehearsing what she would say to banker Hollister. Her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin showed dark circles beneath her eyes, but also a determination that hadn't been there the day before. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a modest blue calico with white piping that her father had ordered from a catalog back when business was still good. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her hair into a neat chignon. Today would determine everything. Her father was having one of his more lucid mornings. As she brought him his breakfast, he studied her attire with shrewd eyes that momentarily reflected the sharp businessman he'd once been. "You're all dressed up," he observed, his voice raspy. "Special occasion." Willow forced a smile. "Just meeting with someone about the store, Pa. Nothing for you to worry about." Old Gerald Lambert frowned, clearly sensing there was more to the story. "That Paxton boy involved. Heard his voice last night. Wasn't dreaming, was I?" "No, Pa, Mr. Paxton did stop by." She busied herself straightening his blankets. "He's been very helpful." "Good man," her father mumbled. "Reminds me of myself at that age, stubborn as a mule but heart's in the right place." Willow patted his hand. "Try to rest today, I'll be back before you know it." As she left her father's room, a soft knock at the store's front door made her heart leap to her throat. Through the glass, she could see Matthew's tall figure, hat in hand. She hurried to let him in. "Morning, Miss Lambert," he said formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied his stiff greeting. "Are you ready?" Willow nodded, gathering her shawl and a small reticule containing her father's deed to the property. "As ready as I'll ever be." They stepped out into the clear morning light together. Main Street was already busy with the day's activities. Miners heading to the diggings mingled with merchants opening their shops. A group of women chatted outside the church, their voices carrying on the crisp air. "Remember," Matthew murmured as they walked, "let me speak first. Hollister respects men who work with their hands more than women with business sense, unfair as that may be." "I'm well aware of Mr. Hollister's antiquated notions," Willow replied dryly. "He made them quite clear when I tried to negotiate after Pa fell ill." They reached the imposing brick building that housed the Overland Bank just as the clerk was unlocking the front door. The young man gave them a curious look. It was unusual for customers to arrive so early but nodded a polite greeting. "We need to speak with Mr. Hollister," Matthew said firmly. "It's an urgent matter that can't wait." "Mr. Hollister doesn't see people without appointments," the clerk began, but Matthew cut him off. "Tell him it's regarding today's gold shipment and the Wayland gang. He'll see us." The clerk's eyes widened, and without further protest he disappeared into the back office. Moments later, a portly man with impressive side whiskers emerged, his face flushed with what might have been exertion or anger. "Paxton, isn't it? And Miss Lambert." Banker Hollister's gaze lingered on Willow, his expression hardening. "If you've come about the foreclosure, I'm afraid there's nothing to discuss. The terms were quite clear." "That's not why we're here, sir," Matthew replied, keeping his voice even. "May we speak privately? What we have to say shouldn't be overheard." Hollister hesitated, then grudgingly motioned them toward his office. 10 minutes. That's all I can spare." Inside the mahogany-paneled office, Hollister settled behind his desk like a king taking his throne. He did not invite them to sit. "Well, what's this about the Wayland gang?" Matthew stepped forward. "They're planning to rob the noon stage today, the one carrying your gold shipment." Hollister's bushy eyebrows shot up. "That's a serious accusation. What proof do you have?" "I overheard two of them discussing it in detail behind the Silver Dollar Saloon." "They've bribed someone in your Rawlins office. They know exactly how much gold is coming and when." The banker's face reddened further. "Impossible. No one in my employ would." "Someone named Phillips," Matthew interrupted. "Does that name mean anything to you?" A flash of recognition crossed Hollister's face before he could mask it. "Phillips is a junior clerk, hardly has access to sensitive information." "Yet he knew enough about today's shipment to sell the information to Wayland," Matthew pressed. "They plan to hit the stage at Devil's Gulch just before it reaches town. They know you'll be on board personally escorting the gold. Hollister's fingers drummed nervously on his desk as he processed this information. And you waited until now to bring this to my attention because we want to make a deal, Willow spoke up, stepping forward to stand beside Matthew. Information for information. I beg your pardon, Hollister blustered. We'll tell you everything we know about their plan, allowing you time to arrange protection for the shipment, she continued, her voice gaining confidence. In exchange, you'll cancel the foreclosure on my father's store and offer us a fair loan to repay our debts. Hollister laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. That's extortion, Miss Lambert. I could have you both arrested. It's a business proposal, Matthew countered. Miss Lambert is offering valuable information that could save your bank thousands of dollars. In return, you extend the same professional courtesy you'd show any valued customer in need of financial arrangements. Besides, Willow added quietly, who would believe you arrested us for trying to prevent a robbery? Especially if that robbery then succeeds because you silenced the only people who tried to warn you. Hollister's face contorted with barely suppressed fury, but calculation shone in his small eyes. After a long moment, he leaned back in his chair. Tell me everything you know. If your information proves accurate, I may be amenable to discussing new terms for your father's loan. Matthew glanced at Willow, who nodded slightly. They have 6 men, he began. They plan to block the road with a fallen tree about a half-mile inside Devil's Gulch. When the stage stops, they'll attack from both sides. They're expecting the usual driver and shotgun messenger plus you. They don't know about any additional security you might have arranged. Hollister stroked his whiskers thoughtfully. And you learned all this from eavesdropping. I worked as a scout for the Army before settling here, Matthew explained. Picking up details is a survival skill. The banker studied them both for several uncomfortable seconds. Very well, he finally said. And I stress, if your information prevents a robbery today, I will consider new loan terms for Lambert's general store. He pulled out a pocket watch. The stage is due in 4 hours. That gives me enough time to arrange a surprise for Mr. Wayland and his associates. Relief washed over Willow's face. Thank you, Mr. Hollister. The banker held up a cautioning finger. Don't thank me yet, Miss Lambert. Your future still hangs in the balance, depending on how events unfold today. His gaze shifted to Matthew. And you, Paxton, what's your stake in all this? Why risk crossing the Wayland gang for the Lambert girl? Matthew's expression remained carefully neutral. Let's just say I have my reasons, sir. A knowing smile spread across Hollister's face. I see. He rose from his chair, indicating the meeting was over. I suggest you both go about your normal business today. It wouldn't do to alert Wayland's men that something is amiss. As they exited the bank, Matthew placed a protective hand at the small of Willow's back, guiding her through the doorway. Once outside and away from potential eavesdroppers, she turned to him, her eyes bright with tentative hope. You think he believed us? Will he help? Hollister's first love is money, Matthew replied, keeping his voice low. He'll do whatever it takes to protect that gold shipment. The question is whether he'll honor his part of the bargain afterward. Willow bit her lip. What if he doesn't? Matthew's expression darkened. Then we move to the second part of my plan. There's a second part, she asked, surprised. Always have a backup, Miss Lambert. He tipped his hat. For now, let's do as Hollister suggested and go about our normal routines. I'll meet you at the general store after the stage arrives. With that, he strode away toward the livery stable, leaving Willow to wonder just what sort of man Matthew Paxton really was, and why he had decided her cause was worth championing. Throughout the morning, Willow tried to focus on normal tasks, sweeping the store floor, organizing inventory, helping the few customers who wandered in. But her mind kept returning to the danger Matthew might be facing if the Wayland gang discovered his betrayal. She had known him only as a quiet, occasional customer before yesterday. Yet today her future, perhaps even her life, was intertwined with his. As noon approached, tension coiled in her stomach. The stage was due to arrive at any moment, and with it would come news of whether their gamble had paid off. She found herself repeatedly drawn to the front window, peering anxiously down the street toward the stage depot. When the sound of thundering hooves finally reached her ears, Willow rushed outside to join the small crowd gathering to meet the incoming stage. The vehicle careened into town at breakneck speed, the driver whipping the team far harder than was customary for a scheduled arrival. It skidded to a halt in front of the depot in a cloud of dust. The door flew open, and Banker Hollister emerged, his face ashen beneath a film of road dust. Behind him came two armed guards, both looking grim but satisfied. There was no sign of the Wayland gang. Willow pressed forward through the curious onlookers, straining to hear as the stage depot manager rushed to meet Hollister. "What happened, Edmund? We weren't expecting you for another half hour." Hollister straightened his vest, attempting to regain his dignity. "Attempted robbery at Devil's Gulch. Wayland and his men, just as we were warned. Fortunately, we were prepared." He gestured to the armed men behind him. Marshall's deputies from Rawlins Road hidden inside the coach. Another 4 followed at a distance. When Wayland made his move, they were waiting. A murmur went through the crowd. "Did you catch them?" someone called out. "Got 2, one of the deputies answered. "Wayland himself and another. The rest scattered, marshals bringing them in separately." Willow's hand flew to her throat. It had worked. Their warning had prevented the robbery. Now, everything depended on whether Hollister would honor his agreement. As if sensing her thoughts, the banker's gaze swept the crowd and locked with hers. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod before turning back to address the growing audience of townspeople. Willow felt her knees weaken with relief. There was still hope. She was so focused on Hollister that she didn't notice Matthew approaching until he spoke softly at her shoulder. "It seems our banker friend kept his word about arranging protection." Willow turned to find him standing close, his expression carefully neutral though his eyes held a question. "Yes," she whispered, "and he nodded to me. I think he means to keep his part of our bargain." "We'll know soon enough," Matthew murmured. "The question now is whether Wayland's capture makes our situation better or worse." "What do you mean?" "Wayland has friends, dangerous ones, if they learn who betrayed their plans." He let the implication hang in the air. A chill ran down Willow's spine. "You think they'd come after us?" "It's possible. Which is why we need to conclude our business with Hollister quickly and decide on our next move." He glanced around at the excited crowd. "This isn't the place to discuss it. Meet me at the store in an hour," Willow nodded, suddenly aware of how many ears might be listening. An hour. She watched as Matthew melted back into the crowd, his tall figure soon lost among the townspeople still gathering to hear details of the foiled robbery. Only then did the full danger of their situation truly hit her. If Wayland's remaining men discovered their role in today's events, neither she nor Matthew might be safe in South Pass City much longer. An hour later, Willow paced nervously behind the counter of the general store, jumping at every sound. When Matthew finally pushed through the door, she nearly cried out with relief. "Any news?" she asked, rushing forward. Matthew nodded, his expression grave. "Marshal Pritchard arrived with Wayland about 20 minutes ago. They've got him locked up at the jailhouse, but it won't hold him long once his men regroup." And he hesitated. "And what?" Willow pressed. Wayland was shouting about traitors as they dragged him in, swearing he'd find out who tipped off the bank and make them pay. Matthew's eyes met hers. It's only a matter of time before someone talks. This town isn't known for keeping secrets. What do we do? Before Matthew could answer, the store door opened again, and Banker Hollister stepped inside. His clothes were still dusty from the journey, but he'd regained his composure. "Miss Lambert," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "Mr. Paxton, I believe we have business to conclude." "Indeed we do," Matthew agreed, his stance subtly shifting to place himself between Willow and the banker. "I trust you've reconsidered the terms of the Lambert loan." Hollister produced a document from his coat pocket. "I've had my clerk draw up new papers. 2-year extension, reasonable interest, not as generous as you might hope, but fair." Willow reached for the document with trembling hands. "May I read it?" "By all means," Hollister replied, a touch of his usual smugness returning. "You'll find it quite straightforward. In exchange for saving the bank a considerable sum today, I'm willing to be flexible." As Willow scanned the document, Matthew kept his attention on Hollister. "There's another matter we need to discuss," he said quietly. "Wayland." Hollister's expression hardened. "What about him?" "He's threatening to find out who warned you. When he does, whoever provided that information won't be safe in South Pass City." "That's hardly my concern," the banker replied dismissively. "Wayland will hang before the month is out." "Maybe," Matthew conceded, "but his men won't, and they have long memories." Hollister considered this, stroking his whiskers thoughtfully. "What exactly are you asking for, Paxton?" "Protection, or the means to leave town if necessary." "I'm not running a charity," Hollister snapped. "No," Willow interjected, looking up from the loan document. "You're running a business, and this is part of the cost of the information we provided. Think of it as an insurance policy for all of us." Banker Hollister's gaze moved between them, calculation evident in his small eyes. Finally, he sighed. "Very well. I have a business associate in Denver who might be able to use a man with your skills, Paxton. And perhaps there's a position for Miss Lambert as well, should it become necessary." "Denver," Willow echoed, her mind spinning. The thought of leaving South Pass City, leaving her father's store and everything she'd known had never occurred to her. "But my father could travel with you," Matthew suggested gently. "Denver has fine doctors, better than anything available here." Willow hesitated, torn. The loan agreement in her hands would save her father's store, but at what cost if Wayland's men came looking for revenge? "You don't have to decide now," Hollister said, his tone surprisingly sympathetic. "But consider it carefully, Miss Lambert. Property can be replaced. Lives cannot." He reached for the document. "If the terms are acceptable, sign here and we'll consider our business concluded." After a moment's hesitation, Willow took the pen Hollister offered and signed her name beside her father's on the loan agreement. As the ink dried, she felt as though she were standing at another kind of precipice, one where the way forward was shrouded in uncertainty. "Thank you, Mr. Hollister," she said formally, handing back the pen. The banker nodded, tucking the signed document into his pocket. "I'll have my clerk deliver a copy to you tomorrow." He turned to go, then paused at the door. "One more thing. If you do decide to leave, don't tell anyone where you're going, not even me. It's safer that way." With that cryptic advice, he departed, the bell above the door jingling in his wake. Matthew and Willow stood in silence for several seconds after his departure, the weight of everything that had happened and everything yet to come hanging heavy between them. "What do you think we should do?" Willow finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Matthew's expression was solemn. "I think we should prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Can your father travel, if necessary? But the store, everything he built, would mean nothing to him if something happened to you, Matthew finished gently. He hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. "Willow, I know we've only truly known each other for a day, but I give you my word I won't let any harm come to you or your father. Whatever decision you make, I'll stand by it." The earnestness in his voice caught her off guard. She looked down at their joined hands, suddenly aware of how natural it felt to have his calloused fingers wrapped around hers. "Why?" she asked, echoing Hollister's earlier question. "Why risk so much for us?" Matthew's gaze was steady, honest. "Because sometimes a man sees something worth protecting, and everything else just falls away." A warmth spread through Willow's chest at his words. Before she could respond, however, the store door burst open again, this time admitting Sheriff Jenkins' young deputy, breathless and wide-eyed. "Miss Lambert, you need to come quick, it's your pa. Doc Sullivan sent me to fetch you, says it's urgent." Fear clutched at Willow's heart. "What happened?" "Don't rightly know, miss, just said to hurry." Matthew squeezed her hand once before releasing it. "Go. I'll lock up here and meet you at your father's room." Willow nodded gratefully and hurried after the deputy, her thoughts in turmoil. Had her father's condition worsened? Had he somehow learned of their predicament? And what would they do now, with Wayland's threats hanging over them and an uncertain future ahead? As she rushed down the dusty street toward her father's sickroom, Willow couldn't shake the feeling that her life had irrevocably changed from the moment Matthew Paxton had asked her to step back from that cliff. Where the path would lead now, only time would tell. When Willow arrived at her father's room above the milliner's shop, she found Dr. Sullivan leaning over the bed, his weathered face grave as he listened to Gerald Lambert's labored breathing through a stethoscope. "What happened?" she demanded, rushing to her father's side. The doctor straightened, shaking his head. "His heart's giving out, Miss Lambert. Mrs. Finch from downstairs said she heard him fall. Found him on the floor, struggling to breathe." Willow's gaze fell to her father's ashen face. His eyes were closed, but his expression was contorted with pain. "Can you help him? I've given him something for the discomfort, but—" Dr. Sullivan's voice trailed off, the unspoken prognosis hanging heavy in the air. "How long?" she whispered. "Hours, maybe a day. I wish I had better news." Willow sank into the chair beside the bed, taking her father's limp hand in hers. The skin felt cool to the touch, nothing like the warm, strong hands she remembered from childhood, hands that had taught her to measure flour for baking, to write her letters, to count change for customers. "I'll stay with him," she said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. Dr. Sullivan nodded, packing his instruments into his black bag. "Send for me if there's any change or if he needs more medicine for the pain." As the doctor left, Willow heard footsteps on the stairs, and moments later Matthew appeared in the doorway, his expression taut with concern. "How is he?" he asked softly. Willow shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Understanding dawned on Matthew's face. Without a word, he removed his hat and crossed to stand behind her chair, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The simple gesture of support broke something inside her, and the tears she'd been fighting began to flow freely. "I can't leave now," she managed between quiet sobs. "Even if Wayland's men come looking for us, I can't take him away from here, not like this." "We'll stay as long as necessary," Matthew assured her, "and I'll keep watch." Through her tears, Willow looked up at him. "You don't have to do that. This isn't your burden." "I made you a promise," Matthew replied simply. "I intend to keep it." For hours, they maintained their vigil as Gerald Lambert drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he seemed lucid, speaking clearly about the store or reminiscing about Willow's childhood. Other times he mumbled incoherently or called out for his long-dead wife. As evening approached, he opened his eyes and focused on Willow with surprising clarity. "You're wearing your good dress," he observed, his voice barely audible. Willow smiled through her tears. "Yes, Pa." "Must be something important." His gaze shifted to Matthew, who stood respectfully near the window. "Paxton, you still here?" Matthew moved closer to the bed. "Yes, sir." Gerald Lambert's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Good, need to ask you something." "Anything, Mr. Lambert." The old man's breathing grew more labored, but he seemed determined to speak. "You going to take care of my girl when I'm gone?" The directness of the question seemed to take Matthew by surprise. He glanced at Willow, whose cheeks had flushed pink, then back to her father. "If she'll allow it, sir, I'd consider it the greatest honor of my life." Gerald nodded weakly. "That's what I thought." His eyes drifted closed again. "Always could tell when a man was sweet on my Willow, just like her mother, beautiful, strong." For a while he fell silent, his breathing growing more shallow. Willow thought he might have drifted off to sleep, but suddenly his eyes opened again, and he gripped her hand with surprising strength. "The store," he said urgently. "Don't let Hollister take it. Your grandfather built that counter by hand. Your mother picked out those curtains." "It's all right, Pa," Willow soothed. "We've worked it out with the bank. The store is safe." Relief washed over Gerald's face. "Good, that's good." His gaze moved to Matthew again. "You'll help her?" "With everything I have," Matthew promised solemnly. Gerald Lambert seemed satisfied with this answer. He relaxed back against the pillows, his eyes growing distant. "Can hear your mother singing," he murmured. "Been so long since I heard her voice." Willow brushed the thin, white hair from his forehead, her tears falling freely now. "Tell her I love her, Pa. Tell her I've missed her every day." A peaceful smile settled on the old man's face. "She knows, sweetheart. She's always known." Those were the last coherent words Gerald Lambert spoke. As night fell over South Pass City, his breathing grew more labored, each breath a struggle until, just after midnight, he drew one final, rattling gasp and was still. Willow sat frozen, her father's hand still clasped in hers, as the truth of his passing washed over her. She felt Matthew's arms encircle her from behind, supporting her as grief threatened to pull her under. "He's gone," she whispered, the words making it real. "My father is gone." "I know," Matthew murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "I'm so sorry, Willow." She turned in his embrace, burying her face against his chest as sobs racked her body. Matthew held her close, one hand stroking her hair as he murmured quiet words of comfort. They remained that way for a long time, until Willow's tears subsided and exhaustion began to take its toll. "You need rest," Matthew said gently, helping her to her feet. "I'll fetch Dr. Sullivan and make the necessary arrangements." Willow nodded numbly, too drained to argue. As Matthew guided her to the small settee in the corner of the room, she found herself leaning heavily on his strength, both physical and emotional. "Don't leave," she whispered as he draped a blanket over her. Matthew's eyes were soft with compassion and something deeper. "I won't. I'll be right here when you wake." True to his word, when Willow opened her eyes to the pale light of dawn, Matthew was there, dozing in a chair he'd pulled close to the settee. The events of the previous day came flooding back the bank, Wayland's capture, her father's death, and with them, a fresh wave of grief. But mingled with the sorrow was something else, a sense that despite everything, she wasn't alone. Matthew Paxton had stood by her through the darkest hours, offering strength when hers had failed. And in the process, something had changed between them, something neither of them had anticipated when he'd found her on that cliff edge. As if sensing her gaze, Matthew stirred, his eyes opening to meet hers. "Morning," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" "Like everything has changed," Willow replied honestly, "and like nothing will ever be the same again." Matthew nodded, understanding. "It won't be." But that doesn't mean there aren't good days ahead, Willow. Different but good. She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. But first, there were practical matters to attend to: her father's burial, the store, and the lingering threat of Wayland's men. What happens now? She asked, sitting up and smoothing her rumpled dress. First, we lay your father to rest properly, Matthew said, his voice gentle but practical. Then we decide what comes next. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and condolence calls from townspeople. To Willow's surprise, Banker Hollister himself attended Gerald Lambert's burial, standing respectfully at the back of the small gathering at the cemetery. Throughout it all, Matthew remained a constant presence at her side, handling the details she couldn't face, offering quiet support when grief overwhelmed her, and keeping a watchful eye for any sign of trouble from Wayland's associates. 4 days after her father's death, Willow reopened the general store, more out of a need for normalcy than anything else. As she stood behind the counter her grandfather had built, she could almost feel her father's presence in the familiar surroundings. The bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to see Matthew entering, his expression serious. "News from the jailhouse," he said without preamble, coming to stand by the counter. "Marshal Pritchard is transporting Wayland to Cheyenne tomorrow for trial. He's requested additional guards from Fort Laramie to escort them." "You think there might be an attempt to free him?" Willow asked, her stomach knotting with renewed anxiety. "It's possible. 3 of his men were spotted in Miner's Delight yesterday. Marshall thinks they might be planning something." Matthew hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about Hollister's offer. Denver might not be such a bad idea, at least until things settle down." Willow ran her fingers over the polished wood of the counter, feeling torn. "This store is all I have left of my family. I can't just abandon it." "You wouldn't be abandoning it," Matthew argued gently. "Just entrusting it to someone else for a while. Mrs. Harper's boy Thomas has been looking for work since the Silver Crown mine played out. He could run things in your absence. And my father's grave, it's still so fresh. Your father would want you safe, Willow. You know that." She did know it, but the thought of leaving South Pass City, the only home she'd ever known, was terrifying in its own way. Yet when she looked at Matthew, standing earnest and concerned before her, she felt a pull toward something new, something that might become just as precious as what she was leaving behind. "If we did go to Denver," she said slowly, testing the idea, "what would we do there?" "Whatever we wanted," Matthew replied, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Denver's growing fast, plenty of opportunities for a woman with your business sense, and for a man with my background in ranching and scouting." Willow questioned, her cheeks warming at the implication. Matthew took a deep breath, as if gathering courage, then reached across the counter to take her hands in his. "Willow, I know it's been less than a week since that moment at the cliff. I know you're grieving. But something happened between us that day, something I can't explain but can't deny either." "Matthew, let me finish, please," he said gently. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm just saying that whatever comes next, whether we stay here or go to Denver or somewhere else entirely, I want to face it with you. If you'll have me." Willow looked down at their joined hands, his tanned and calloused from years of outdoor work, hers paler but no less capable. In the short time she'd known the real Matthew Paxton, he had shown her more kindness, more courage, and more constancy than she'd experienced from anyone outside her family. "My father liked you," she said finally, looking up to meet his gaze. "He was a good judge of character. Is that a yes?" Matthew asked, hope kindling in his eyes. Before she could answer, the store door burst open and Sheriff Jenkins rushed in, his face grave. "Paxton, Miss Lambert, you need to pack whatever you can carry and come with me right now," he said urgently. Matthew tensed. What's happened, Sheriff? Wayland escaped during transfer to the marshal's custody, killed a deputy in the process. Jenkins glanced nervously out the window. Before they got him, Hollister's clerk Phillips confessed to telling Wayland who tipped off the bank about the robbery. He told Wayland about us. Willow gasped, ice flooding her veins. Jenkins nodded grimly. Wayland swore he'd come for you both. His men were already in the area waiting. They could be heading this way now. Matthew's expression hardened. How long do we have? Not long. I've got a wagon ready behind the jailhouse. Can get you to the Sweetwater station in time for the evening stage to Rawlins. From there, you can take the train. The sheriff looked apologetically at Willow. I'm sorry, Miss Lambert. I know you just buried your father, but if you stay, I understand, Willow interrupted, a strange calm settling over her. The decision had been made for her. Give us 10 minutes to gather some belongings. 5, Jenkins countered. I'll wait outside. Hurry. As the sheriff exited, Willow turned to Matthew, her mind racing. My father's pocket watch, his Bible, I need to get them from upstairs. Go, Matthew urged. I'll gather whatever supplies we can carry. Meet me in the back room in 5 minutes. They separated, each moving with urgent purpose. Willow raced up the stairs to her small living quarters, grabbing a carpetbag and stuffing it with essentials, a change of clothes, her mother's locket, her father's few treasured possessions. Her hands trembled as she worked, the reality of their danger finally sinking in. When she returned to the store's back room, Matthew was waiting with 2 saddlebags full of provisions and a small locked box she recognized as containing the store's emergency funds. Sheriff's getting anxious, he said, taking her carpetbag. Are you ready? Willow looked around at the store that had been her family's life for 2 generations. Every shelf, every corner held memories. The thought of never seeing it again sent a pang through her heart. I'll never be ready, she admitted softly. But I'll go. Matthew's expression softened. He set down their bags and stepped closer, framing her face gently between his hands. I can't replace what you're losing, Willow, but I swear to you we'll build something new together, something your father would be proud of. In his eyes, she saw a future she hadn't dared imagine, one filled with possibility rather than loss. Without thinking, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his in a brief, tender kiss. For luck, she whispered as she pulled away, her cheeks flushed. Matthew looked momentarily stunned, then a slow smile spread across his face. With luck like that, we can't possibly fail. The sound of Sheriff Jenkins urgently calling their names broke the moment. Gathering their belongings, they slipped out through the store's back entrance, leaving behind everything familiar but carrying with them the promise of something new. As the sheriff's wagon rattled out of South Pass City under the cover of early evening darkness, Willow looked back at the silhouette of the town against the sunset. She felt Matthew's hand close over hers, warm and reassuring. We'll come back someday, he promised quietly, when it's safe. Willow nodded, squeezing his hand in return. I know we will. But even as she said it, she realized that the pain of leaving was already being tempered by a growing sense of anticipation. Whatever awaited them beyond the horizon, they would face it together. The journey to Denver was arduous but uneventful. From Rawlins, they took the Union Pacific eastward, the landscape gradually changing from the rugged mountains of Wyoming to the rolling foothills of Colorado. Throughout the trip, Matthew remained vigilant, always aware of their fellow passengers, always positioned between Willow and potential danger. By the time they reached Denver, nearly a week had passed since their hasty departure from South Pass City. The Colorado capital was everything Willow had heard and more, bustling, growing, alive with the energy of a city coming into its own. As their carriage carried them from the train station to the address banker Hollister had provided, she found herself both intimidated and exhilarated by the prospect of starting anew in such a place. Hollister's associate, a silver-haired businessman named Harrington, received them warmly at his downtown office, explaining that Edmund had telegraphed ahead about their situation. "Terrible business, this Wayland character," Harrington said, shaking his head as he poured them each a cup of coffee. "But Edmund speaks highly of you both, says you showed remarkable courage." "We did what was necessary," Matthew replied modestly. Harrington studied them over the rim of his cup. "Well, as promised, I believe I can be of assistance. I own several properties around Denver, including a small mercantile on Larimer Street that's in need of experienced management." He looked directly at Willow. "Edmund mentioned you practically ran your father's store single-handedly, Miss Lambert." Willow straightened in her chair. "I did, yes." "Excellent. The previous proprietor retired rather suddenly, leaving me in something of a bind. The living quarters above the shop are modest but comfortable. If you're interested, the position is yours." Hope bloomed in Willow's chest. "That's incredibly generous, Mr. Harrington. Not generosity, Miss Lambert, good business. A well-run mercantile benefits us both." He turned to Matthew. "As for you, Mr. Paxton, I understand you have experience as a scout and rancher." Matthew nodded. 7 years with the Army, 3 running cattle in Wyoming before that. My associate James Forrester is looking for a foreman at his ranch just outside the city. Man who knows livestock and can handle himself in difficult situations. The pay is good, and you could ride into town regularly." Harrington smiled knowingly. "To check on the mercantile, of course." By sunset, Willow found herself standing in the middle of what was to be her new home and business, a tidy storefront with living quarters that, while smaller than her father's establishment, held distinct promise. The previous owner had left most of the fixtures and some inventory, giving her a foundation upon which to build. "What do you think?" Matthew asked as he brought in the last of their meager belongings. He'd already accepted the position at Forrester's ranch, with the understanding that he'd start in a week's time. Willow ran her hand along a shelf, wiping away a thin layer of dust. "It needs work. A woman's touch." She turned to face him, a small smile playing at her lips. "But I think it could be something special." Matthew set down his burden and crossed to where she stood. Without hesitation, he gathered her into his arms, holding her close as if afraid she might disappear. After a moment's surprise, Willow relaxed against him, finding comfort in his solid presence. "I was so worried we wouldn't make it," he confessed quietly, "that Wayland would find us before we could get away." "But we did make it," Willow reminded him, pulling back slightly to look up at his face. "We're safe, we have work, a place to live." "And each other," Matthew added, his gaze searching hers. "At least I hope." In answer, Willow rose on tiptoe and kissed him again, this time with no hesitation, no excuse of luck or circumstance. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, she smiled up at him. "Definitely each other," she affirmed. "Though I think we have some courting to do before my father would consider it proper." Matthew laughed, the sound warming her from within. "Miss Willow Lambert, I would be honored to court you properly, starting tomorrow. Tonight, however, we both need rest." He was right, of course. The journey had left them both exhausted, emotionally and physically. With reluctance, they parted ways, Matthew to a boarding house down the street where he'd taken a room until the ranch position started. Willow to explore her new living quarters upstairs. As she prepared for bed that night, Willow found herself standing at the window, looking out at the lamplit streets of Denver. It wasn't South Pass City. It wasn't the home she'd known all her life. But perhaps she thought as she climbed between the unfamiliar sheets. It could become home in time. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity as Willow threw herself into renovating the mercantile. She cleaned every corner, rearranged displays, and carefully assessed what inventory to keep and what to replace. Harrington proved a fair landlord, advancing her enough capital to stock new goods and even hire a local boy to help with deliveries and heavy lifting. Matthew rode in from the ranch every Sunday without fail, often staying until Monday morning before heading back to his duties. Under the watchful eyes of neighboring shopkeepers, they maintained propriety in public, but their private moments grew increasingly tender as spring blossomed into summer. One Sunday in July, Matthew arrived with a letter forwarded from banker Hollister in South Pass City. Sheriff Jenkins sent it to Hollister, who sent it on to Harrington, Matthew explained as he handed over the envelope. News from home. Willow's heart quickened as she broke the seal. Inside was a brief note from the sheriff, along with a newspaper clipping. Wayland was captured, she read aloud, her voice trembling with emotion. In Montana Territory, he and 2 of his men tried to rob a bank in Helena and were killed in the attempt. She looked up at Matthew, eyes wide. It's over. They're gone. Matthew's face reflected her own relief. Are there any other news from South Pass City? Willow returned to the letter. Sheriff says the store is being well looked after by young Thomas Harper, just as you suggested. The town's doing well. The new silver strike at the Mountain Queen mine has brought in fresh business. She folded the letter carefully. He says we'd be welcome to return any time. Do you want to? Matthew asked quietly. Go back, I mean. The question hung between them, weighted with significance. Willow considered it seriously, thinking of her father's grave, the store that had been in her family for generations, the familiar streets and faces of her hometown. I think. She began slowly. I think someday we might visit, but not to stay. She gestured around at the mercantile, now thriving under her management. I've built something here, Matthew. Something that's truly mine, not just inherited. And you're doing well at the ranch. Forrester practically sings your praises to anyone who'll listen. That's true, Matthew acknowledged with a smile, but I'd give it up in a heartbeat if you wanted to go home. Willow stepped closer to him, taking his hands in hers. That's just it. I am home. Wherever you are, that's home to me now. The look that passed between them was one of perfect understanding. Matthew pulled her gently into his arms, his embrace familiar and comforting after months of Sunday visits. In that case, Miss Lambert, he murmured against her hair, I have something else to ask you. When he released her and dropped to one knee, producing a small velvet box from his pocket, Willow's hands flew to her mouth. Inside the box was a modest gold ring set with a single pearl. It's not fancy, Matthew said apologetically, but it was my mother's and her mother's before that. And I can't think of anyone more deserving to wear it next. He took a deep breath. Willow Lambert, will you make me the happiest man in Colorado Territory and agree to be my wife? Tears blurred Willow's vision as she nodded emphatically. Yes, she managed to whisper. Oh, Matthew, yes. The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, as if it had been made for her all along. As Matthew rose to kiss her, their first kiss as an engaged couple, Willow couldn't help but think of that moment on the cliff edge, how close she had come to never experiencing this joy. How one man's gentle words, "Step back with me," had changed the course of her entire life. They were married that autumn in a small ceremony at Denver's Episcopal Church, with Mr. Harrington giving away the bride and James Forrester standing as Matthew's best man. To Willow's surprise, banker Hollister made the journey from South Pass City to attend, bringing with him a deed to her father's store, now legally transferred to her name. A wedding present, he explained gruffly. "You may not want to go back now, but someday you might. It should stay in your family." As winter settled over Denver, the newlyweds established a comfortable routine. Matthew continued his work at Forrester's ranch, though he now returned to town each night rather than staying at the ranch bunkhouse. Willow's mercantile flourished, expanding to include a small lending library at the back of the store, a service particularly appreciated by the growing number of families settling in their neighborhood. One snowy evening in February, as they sat before the fire in their living quarters above the shop, Matthew broached a subject that had been on both their minds. "Forrester's offered me a partnership in the ranch," he said, watching Willow's face carefully. "He has no sons, and his daughter's husband has no interest in ranching. He's offering a quarter share now with the possibility of more in the future." Willow set aside her mending. "That's wonderful news, Matthew. You've certainly earned his trust. It would mean more responsibility." "Longer hours, at least at first," he hesitated. "And eventually we might want to consider building a proper house out there, closer to the operation." "Leave the mercantile, you mean?" Willow asked, surprised. "Not necessarily. We could keep it, hire a manager, or sell it if you preferred. Use the capital to invest more in the ranch." Matthew leaned forward earnestly. "But I won't consider it if it's not what you want, Willow. The shop is yours, your creation." Willow was quiet for a moment, considering. The mercantile had been her salvation when they'd arrived in Denver, a purpose, a future when everything familiar had been ripped away. But now, a year later, she had so much more. A husband she adored, friends, a community that valued her. "I think," she said slowly, "that I've proven to myself what I needed to prove, that I could start over, build something successful on my own." She smiled at Matthew. "Maybe it's time for us to build something together." The relief and joy on his face told her she'd made the right decision. "We don't have to rush," he assured her. "Take time to find the right manager or buyer if that's what you decide. And in the meantime," Willow added with a meaningful smile, "we might want to consider another addition to our family, one that will certainly change our priorities." Matthew's brow furrowed in momentary confusion before understanding dawned. "Willow, are you saying?" She nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her. "Dr. Maxwell confirmed it yesterday. By late summer there will be 3 of us." With a whoop of joy, Matthew swept her into his arms, spinning her around the small sitting room until they were both laughing and breathless. As he set her gently back on her feet, his hands lingered protectively at her waist. "A baby," he said in wonder. "Our baby." "Our future," Willow corrected softly, reaching up to touch his cheek. Another chapter in a story that almost ended before it began. Matthew caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I thank God every day that I found you on that cliff," he murmured, "that you chose to step back with me." "As do I," Willow whispered, leaning into his embrace. "As do I." Their son, Gerald Matthew Paxton, was born on a golden September afternoon, strong and healthy with his father's blue eyes and a tuft of auburn hair that promised to match his mother's. By then, Willow had sold the mercantile to a young couple from St. Louis, using part of the proceeds to purchase additional land adjacent to what was now officially called the Forrester and Paxton Ranch. Construction on their new home began the following spring. A comfortable 2-story house with wide porches and plenty of room for the family they both hoped would continue to grow. Willow insisted on incorporating elements that reminded her of South Pass City. A kitchen window that faced east like her father's had, bookshelves built to the exact dimensions of those in Lambert's general store, a desk made from wood salvaged from her childhood home. "So we never forget where we came from," she explained to Matthew as they watched the builders work. "Or how far we've come," he added, their son sleeping contentedly against his shoulder. 5 years after that fateful day at the cliff's edge, the Paxtons hosted a housewarming party at their completed home. Friends from Denver mingled with ranch hands and neighboring families. James Forrester, now stooped with age but still sharp-witted, held court on the front porch, regaling listeners with tales of the early days of the territory. Little Gerald, now a sturdy 4-year-old with his father's charm and his mother's determination, raced around the yard with the other children, occasionally stopping to check on his baby sister, Emma Rose, who watched the proceedings from her mother's arms. As twilight descended and lanterns were lit around the property, Matthew found Willow standing alone at the edge of the gathering, her gaze distant. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Paxton," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. Willow smiled, leaning into him as his arm slipped around her waist. "I was just thinking about all the twists and turns that brought us here, if you hadn't found me that day." "But I did," Matthew reminded her gently, "and here we are." "Here we are," she echoed, surveying their home, their land, their children, and the community they'd built around themselves. "It's more than I ever dared hope for, Matthew. When I stood on that cliff, I couldn't see a way forward. But you showed me that there's always another path, if you're brave enough to take it." Matthew pressed a kiss to her temple. "You're the bravest person I know, Willow Paxton, and the best decision I ever made was asking you to step back with me." As they rejoined their guests, hands linked and hearts full, Willow reflected on how a moment of despair had led to a lifetime of joy. The cliff edge that had nearly claimed her life had instead given her a new beginning, one filled with love, family, and a future brighter than she could have imagined. In the years that followed, the Paxton Ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Matthew's innovative breeding techniques and Willow's shrewd business acumen proved a formidable combination. Their family grew to include a third child, Robert James, born 2 years after Emma Rose. They did eventually return to South Pass City, not to stay, but to visit, to show their children the place where their mother had grown up, and to place flowers on Gerald Lambert's grave. The town had changed, as all places do with time, but Lambert's General Store still stood, now run by Thomas Harper's own son, a testament to the legacy that had begun there generations before. Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and family illnesses. But through it all, Matthew and Willow faced each challenge together, their bond only strengthened by the obstacles they overcame. And sometimes, on clear evenings when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, they would sit together on the porch of the home they'd built, watching the sun set over the land they'd come to love, hands clasped between them in silent acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them there, a journey that began with 7 simple words spoken at the edge of a cliff. "Step back with me."